Hey everybody, welcome to your Apple Update. I'm your host John Sherrod, and this is a cool day because Apple just released new MacBook Pro models. And what I want to do is kind of talk about three aspects of this. One, what does this mean for the state of the MacBook Pro and the Mac in general currently as we stand today? Two, I want to get into the discussion about the keyboard because that's been on the minds of a lot of Mac users as we have kind of seen the development of this butterfly keyboard design that Apple's had since going back to the really super thin MacBook that came out with a few years ago, but it came to the MacBook Pro in 2016. So keyboard number two. Third thing I want to talk about is what does this mean for the Mac over the course of the next year or two? Really the most important thing to know about this is a speed bump update. Apple's really highlighting the fact that this is the first time they've had an 8-core MacBook Pro. This is using the 9th generation Intel processor. At the end of the day, this just means it's faster, especially faster for the type of operations or the type of tasks that require high CPU performance. The most important thing that this means is that Apple is continuing to pay attention to the Mac and update the Mac lines and keep them current, especially the MacBook Pro. The MacBook Pro is arguably Apple's most important Mac because it is the one used by more people than probably any other model, at least in terms of doing sort of productive work. Now, it may be that they sell more MacBook Airs overall that are used for college students and people at home, but as far as being kind of the flagship Mac in the line, it is the MacBook Pro. And even when we come out, when Apple debuts the new MacBook Pro that they've been promising us for a couple of years, the MacBook Pro is still going to be a very, very important driver of what people think of when they think of the Mac line from a hardware standpoint. So the fact that Apple has now, they redesigned the MacBook Pro in 2016, kind of in October, with the design that we've come to be familiar with now with the USB-C ports and this new butterfly keyboard design, which we'll talk about in a second. And they have had an update for it every year since then. So this is the fourth update we've had since the original, or I guess the third update, the fourth model, counting that original. So we had that in October 2016, and then in, I think, June 2017, we had the next speed bump of that. And then in July of last year, we had the next speed bump. And now here we are right at the end of May 2019, and we've gotten the latest update to that. So, if you'll recall, that was a big thing back in 2016, leading up to the debut of that new redesigned MacBook Pro that a lot of people were hitting Apple over is hey, you're not coming out with regular updates to your core Mac product lines. And so it's been really encouraging to see that we're now on the fourth revision of this MacBook Pro product that was introduced in late 2016. So Apple has been really faithful on that line in particular of coming out with regular sustained speed bump updates for it. And that's really what we wanted to see. We don't need to see a major redesign of the MacBook Pro every year, every couple of years. We just want to see those regular sustained updates that let us know that, hey, Apple's continuing to highly value the Mac as a product and highly value Mac customers, particularly Pro customers, which is a lot of things these days, from video editors to coders to graphic design. But more than that, the MacBook Pro is used for way more mundane tasks, from marketing to word processing to web browsing, by a whole lots of different people in a whole lots of different lines of work, and also in home uses as well. So it's been very encouraging to see Apple continue to do that. So second, let's talk about the keyboard. So the keyboard has been, to say the least, a controversial thing about these MacBook Pros since they were first introduced. They feel different than Apple's previous keyboards, and they have had a higher rate of failure than probably any keyboard that Apple has ever had. I don't think that's a controversial thing to say. Now, I still think that Apple is being truthful when they say that you are not likely to have a keyboard problem with a current MacBook Pro. The fact that there have been way higher numbers of it than there ever have been before with a Mac portable computer is alarming, and it's something that Apple needs to kick in the butt once and for all. But you're not likely to experience this issue. That tracks with what Apple has said, and it tracks with what I've just experienced personally and experiencing a lot of these different things and talking to a lot of people that have them. So I definitely would not say don't buy a current MacBook Pro, because you are more likely than ever to have a keyboard problem with a MacBook Pro, but you're still not very likely to have a problem with a keyboard with a MacBook Pro. And with this new model, Apple again paid some attention to the keyboard, and they say that they are using a new material inside the butterfly keyboard key mechanism that they say should significantly reduce issues with the keyboard. And that's one of those things what I hope is true, and I'm encouraged by the fact that Apple is continuing to make efforts to improve the keyboard, but we're going to have to wait and see whether or not that's true, or whether or not we're still seeing higher numbers of issues with them than we would want to see. But I do appreciate that they continue to make some efforts to improve it, and they also have even included these new models in their repair extension program. So if you have a problem with your keyboard anytime within 4 years of the purchase of the computer, Apple's going to take care of that keyboard at no cost to you, provided you didn't do something to physically damage it. But where it's just a manufacturer defect, it's just stopped working in a way that it should not in that span of time, Apple's going to take care of it for you. And they've also improved the rate at which they make that repair, because it's not a trivial repair. These things are so tightly assembled that any kind of repair like that requires a lot of skill and training and some time to do. But Apple is now committed to next day turnaround time on repairs for these. So you're not going to have to be without your MacBook Pro for a long time to get it repaired. So that's encouraging to see. And I hope that this really does truly, be the final nail in the coffin on these keyboard issues Apple's had, because it's definitely had a PR hit as far as what people think about the quality of Apple hardware. Some of it is overblown, but there's a legitimate problem there that Apple has needed to address. And then I think the third thing that I wanted to talk about is, what does this mean for the Mac going forward? Because we're still, a lot of us still think there's a really solid chance that Apple starts in part or in whole moving away from Intel as its CPU supplier toward its own in-house designed ARM chips, like they do in every other hardware product Apple makes. So the iPhone and the iPad and the Apple Watch and the AirPods all have Apple designed chips running in them. And Apple's been getting some incredible performance out of its chips in the iPad in particular and in the iPhone. So it's not a stretch to imagine that Apple would abandon Intel in part or in whole in favor of its own chips. And we could see that announced as early as this year's Worldwide Developers Conference here in just a couple of weeks. So does the timing of this release of this new MacBook Pro mean that it's not going to happen, or it's not going to happen now? I don't know. Even if they announced a switch to Apple's own chips at this WWDC, if you think back to 2005 when Apple switched away from the PowerPC chip over to Intel, they announced that at WWDC, and they didn't have the first models you could purchase until January, and it was across that whole next year. They announced it in mid-2005, and it was all across 2006 that Apple was transitioning all of its product lines over to the Intel chip. And I want to say the MacBook Pros were kind of mid-2006 when those came out. The iMac and maybe the MacBook came out in like January of 2006. So if they do make a switch like that, it's not going to happen overnight. And the question is, would they switch all of their models over to it, or just some? What would that look like? We don't know. But even if they're planning to have a redesigned MacBook Pro running on Apple's ARM chip this time next year, I'm still encouraged that they released a speed bump update to the existing MacBook Pro line, because, again, we want to see Apple continue to do that. So I don't know if this announcement says anything about whether or not we're going to see that at this WWDC. Of course, it may never happen at all. It may not happen until next year, but I still think there's a chance we see that happen this year. And if we do, buckle up. It's going to be an exciting next year and a half for sure. We're going to find out what happens really soon. But this is it for this episode of Your Apple Update. I'm your host, John Sherrod. What do you think about the new MacBook Pros? Are you satisfied with what Apple's done as far as the speed bumps? What do you think about the keyboard? Drop me a comment and let me know. And we'll see you next time. Bye.